My name is Alexander Harding. I'm 32, and until recently, my family only knew me as the unemployed one. I was the guy who showed up to gatherings in simple clothes, no wedding ring, no kids, no financed house, no new car in the driveway. According to them, I was the one who hadn't made it. The weird cousin, the disappointing nephew. What no one knew, and I made sure to keep it that way, was that I was a self-taught developer. I'd spent the last 11 months locked in my apartment in Austin, Texas, working day and night on a personal project no one around me would understand. It was an app that blended artificial intelligence, mood tracking, and personalized content recommendations. I nicknamed it MindSync. While most thought I was living off small freelance gigs or my parents' help, I was writing over 80,000 lines of code, testing behavioral patterns, refining the user experience. I hired freelancers through Upwork under pseudonyms, used VPNs to obfuscate my access, and kept the files on encrypted servers. Not out of paranoia, out of strategy. I knew that if it worked, it would be huge. And if it failed, well, no one would need to know. The Thanksgiving gathering was always a minefield, I already knew that. But this year was special. The get-together was at my Aunt Carol's house. The table was laden with food, conversations were loud, and it was the same old script. Who got married, who bought a house, who got promoted. The inevitable moment arrived. My cousin Chad Miller, bank manager, tight suit, gelled hair, and an automatic smile, looked at me with that air of superiority he reserved especially for these moments. So, Alex, found a real job yet? Or are you still in that Zen mode of living on air, meditation, and hope? Laughter. Lots of it. Some uncomfortable. Some sincere. I just offered a slight smile, stirring my mashed potatoes. My Aunt Carol didn't miss a beat. This boy has potential, but he lives with his head in the clouds. We need stability, Alexander. This app thing won't put food on the table. My other cousin chimed in. Maybe he's waiting to launch the next Facebook. Who knows, maybe we're sitting with a future billionaire and don't even know it. They laughed. I did too. Because it was true. Only no one there had any idea how close to the truth they actually were. The difference is, I didn't need to convince them, nor defend myself. I had something far more powerful. Time. MindSync had already launched 3 weeks earlier, in a closed beta, with a viral growth strategy. No branding, no public face, just an artificial intelligence that connected people to their emotions. In 3 weeks, the number of users had jumped past 200,000. On the day of the dinner, it was about to surpass 500,000. Among the downloads, my Aunt Carol and Chad. They loved the app. They had made stories about how it changed their routines, how they felt like someone finally understood them. One of them even appeared in a video organically promoted by a TikTok influencer, praising the app's mood self-diagnosis feature. While they ate turkey and laughed at me, they were receiving notifications on their phones. Sent by me, coded by me, conceived by me. That night I was the last to leave my aunt's house. It was cold, the sky clear. I got into my rented car. Yes, rented. Because I didn't want to tie myself to anything physical while negotiating with 2 Silicon Valley investment funds. Turned on the heater and looked at my phone. The metrics didn't lie. This was the night MindSync was going to explode. The next day, an interview with TechCrunch was scheduled, which would reveal the platform's creator. The text was already approved, the photos ready, the press agency hired. Deep down, I only had one question. How long would it take for them to connect the dots? But I confess that seeing their expressions when they found out, it was a sweet anticipation. I woke up early. The sun hadn't fully broken the horizon when my phone vibrated with the first notification of the day. The article was out. TechCrunch headline: The brain behind the year's most addictive app is a self-taught Texan with zero corporate experience. My name was there. A discreet photo, white background, eyes fixed on the camera. No pose, just truth. I opened the comments. Hundreds in less than an hour. Then thousands, shares, reposts, invitations to podcasts, interviews, panels. I already knew it was coming. I planned it down to the smallest detail. But I confess, nothing prepares you for seeing your own name circling the globe. It was like watching someone who wasn't me take center stage, and yet, every single word was mine. MindSync shot to #1 on the App Store and Google Play. The beta version became the official product. The number of users surpassed 2 million in less than 72 hours. The server almost crashed. I had to hire 2 infrastructure companies to keep everything online. Emergency contracts, data migration, coordination with technical support, and all this happening while my name appeared on CNN Business and The Verge. Meanwhile, Chad was posting stories about how this app is saving my sanity. My Aunt Carol made an emotional Facebook post saying that finally someone understood what self-care is. All the comments were praising, sharing, tagging friends. I read everything with a mix of disbelief and coldness, because it was almost comical. 2 days after the interview, the principal of my youngest cousin's school sent me a private message on Instagram. She wanted to know if I could give a lecture about technology and personal triumph. She said her family talked about me as if I were a celebrity. The same family that until days ago barely included me in conversations. The next morning, I got a call from my mom. Her voice was a little choked up. She said, "Alex, I saw an article. It's about you, isn't it?" I took a deep breath. "It is, Mom. Why did you never tell us?" "Because no one would have believed me, and because it was better this way." She was silent. Then she just said, "I'm proud," and hung up. She was always the only one who didn't laugh, never said anything bad, but also never intervened. The phone kept ringing for days, calls from family, from Chad, from Aunt Carol, from distant uncles and aunts. Text messages, emails with invitations for lunches and dinners. The language was always the same: surprise, happiness for me, and an almost desperate attempt to reconnect, as if everything that happened before had been erased. But I remembered. Every look, every passive-aggressive comment, every stifled laugh when I walked through the room. It wasn't resentment. It was memory. And memory, when used well, becomes fuel. Chad sent me a long message on LinkedIn. He said he always saw potential in me, that he never doubted my intelligence, and that he was open to helping me manage the financial side now that I had so much at stake. I finished reading with a half smile and deleted it. My Aunt Carol wrote an email with the subject, "From a mother to her son." It said she saw me as the son she never had, that everything she said was out of love, and that she hoped I understood. It ended with, "You've surprised me, my dear." I'm touched. None of that fazed me, because by that point I had already understood the pattern. It wasn't about me. It was about them. It always had been. And the most ironic part, they were trying to reconnect using the same app they'd laughed at when I mentioned it years ago, when MindSync was just a name scribbled on a napkin. Now it was the bridge they were trying to cross to get back to me. Behind the scenes, while everything exploded, I kept working. My remote team had already doubled. We started receiving acquisition offers. Meta, Amazon, even Oracle. The values exceeded 9 figures, but I didn't want to sell. Not yet. This was personal. I was involved in everything: design, usability, data strategy, contracts. Every decision was mine. Not out of ego, but because every line of the project had my identity. Selling too early would be like handing my story over for someone else to rewrite. Some investors said it was emotional foolishness, that I should think like a businessman. But what they didn't know, and neither did my family, is that this app wasn't just a startup. It was my answer, my revenge, my legacy. In a meeting with the branding team, someone suggested publicly revealing my story in a commercial. A video with an inspiring tone. An ordinary man, underestimated, who became a tech giant with an idea and a keyboard. The idea was good, but I didn't accept. I said, "I don't need the world to know who I was. I just need my family to never forget." They nodded. Respectful silence, and we moved on. Meanwhile, the family invitations kept coming, now with sentimental touches, old photos attached, promises of warm reunions. Aunt Carol even sent a handwritten card, but I no longer responded. I just read them. I knew time would take care of the rest. And it did. Little by little, the silence I maintained began to bother them more than any direct response. It wasn't a silence of contempt. It was a total absence of validation. And for those who live for image, status, and approval, that hurts more than a no. I saw it in their movements. The frequency of messages increased, but the tone shifted, from celebration to guilt, from pride to regret. Some relatives started reposting old news where I was indirectly mentioned, trying to show they were always there. Others tried to latch onto any detail of our shared past. Remember when you told me about a similar idea, Alex? I knew it would work. I read everything and said nothing, not out of pride, but out of choice. Because sometimes silence is the most sophisticated answer you can give. The following week, I participated in a panel discussion at SXSW, alongside founders I had always admired, people who shaped the internet as we know it today. I left the room with 4 partnership proposals, 3 invitations for private mentorships, and an invitation to be a keynote speaker at the Web Summit in Lisbon. I said yes to only one of them. The others, I politely declined, because now I could choose. Chad heard about the talk. A friend of his from the banking sector sent him a screenshot of a segment where I talked about how the greatest ideas emerge when no one believes in you. Chad responded to that friend with emojis and a "that's my cousin." The same cousin who, weeks earlier, asked if I was still thinking about life. I started getting invited for bigger interviews. CNN, Bloomberg, even Time magazine wanted an extensive profile. My face began circulating with captions like, "The silent genius of the new tech generation." Still, I never mentioned my family. Not a public word, not a subtle jab. Their pain was precisely this, knowing I existed on another level and they weren't part of it. One day, my mom called again. She wanted to know if I was going to Christmas in Houston. She said everyone would be there, that it would be good to reconnect. I simply replied, "Mom, I'm sorry, but I have commitments in Dublin that week. Let's reschedule something just for us next year." She understood. She always understands, because deep down she also saw everything that happened. And even in silence, she knew. She followed the behind the scenes with a heavy heart, but respected my space. On Christmas Eve, I posted a photo on LinkedIn. No luxury, no ostentation, just my workspace, a cup of coffee, open code on the monitor, and the caption, "Grateful for a year of productive silence." It was the most liked post of my life. People liked it not just out of admiration, but out of identification. Silence for many was also home. In parallel, MindSync became a case study in universities. Stanford, MIT, and Berkeley were dissecting the algorithm we built. A professor even said it was the first emotional AI with real-time cultural context reading created by an independent team. To me, it was just an idea that worked, but seeing it become an object of study was surreal. I received invitations to lecture in master's classes, contribute to scientific publications, and mentor research groups. What was a personal project became an academic reference, and my story, which began as a joke at a family dinner, became inspirational material for thousands. Internally, we grew the team to over 40 people. Most were freelancers and consultants I personally selected. I liked hiring those who had been underestimated, who had talent but no chance. It was my silent way of giving back what I was never given. I created a scholarship program within the company. People rejected by big tech companies could apply for direct mentorship with me. Many of the industry's rejects became leaders within MindSync. Meanwhile, my family watched everything. From afar. Increasingly uncomfortably. My Uncle Harold, who always said technology was kid stuff with no future, now used MindSync every day to organize his goals. My cousin, who studied psychology, wrote her thesis on the app's behavioral impact. My Aunt Carol, as far as I know, tried to convince a journalist friend to interview me for a column on humanizing success. She was ignored. It wasn't active revenge. It was a natural consequence. They laughed at me behind my back. Now they applauded me behind my back, but no one had the courage to do it to my face. What was once a punchline was now a resume. Failure turned into a benchmark. And the shame that surrounded me at family lunches transformed into the most uncomfortable absence in the room. The weight of silence was theirs now. At the turn of the year, I was invited to a private event for founders and investors in Aspen. Names I once only saw in headlines were now exchanging business cards with me. At a private dinner, one of them told me, "You have an unusual talent, but more than that, you have a long memory." I smiled, because he understood everything. And it was there, between glasses of wine and snow outside, that I realized, justice doesn't need to be shouted. It settles in silence, in the exact place where arrogance thought it would reign forever. The invitation to Aspen was just the beginning. After that cold night, I returned to Austin with a clarity I hadn't had before. It was time to build something bigger. MindSync's success was no longer just mine. There was an ecosystem of people, talents, and stories connecting through something that was born from my silence. So I started sketching the next step. I created the MindWorks Foundation, a parallel entity to the company, with an initial fund of $20 million. The mission was simple: to finance ideas from overlooked individuals. People like me, self-taught, neurodivergent, people outside the Ivy League mold. For each approved project, there was one requirement: maintain authorship. No absorbing talent in the name of a brand. I wanted to see names shine on their own. Soon the foundation became news. Forbes called it Silicon Valley's most humane arm. Success stories began to emerge. A young black woman from New Jersey created a reading app for dyslexic children. A former inmate from Detroit developed a social re-entry tracking system. A Latina single mother created an emotional support platform for immigrant women. I personally got involved in the projects. I visited their homes. I talked to the creators. Sometimes I just listened. Other times I rewrote code with them. It wasn't about saving anyone. It was about activating what already existed and just needed fertile ground. And every story that blossomed was like a rearview mirror. I saw myself in them, and that healed me in silence. By this point, MindSync had already surpassed 50 million users, and I had inadvertently become a symbol: interviews, awards, tributes. But I kept refusing one thing: to mention my family publicly. Because even though everything had changed, deep down, the truth was that they weren't part of the construction. They didn't deserve to share the credit. But fate is subtle. One random afternoon, I received an email from Chad. Unlike the previous ones, this was short. "Alex, I know I messed everything up. I just needed to write to you to say that I saw everything. And I'm sorry. For the first time, I understood that your silence was your way of protecting us from ourselves. Thank you for not returning hate. And forgive me." I read it. It took me days to respond, not because I wanted to punish, but because I needed to digest it. When I replied, I only wrote, "I accept your apologies, and I hope one day you also forgive yourself." We never spoke again. The following year, I received an invitation to give a lecture in Houston. Ironic. The city where so many wounds began now wanted to hear from me. The event would be at the same convention center where Chad was honored years ago as a banking industry standout. This time, it was about technology with social impact, and I would be the closing speaker. When I walked onto the stage, the packed audience gave a standing ovation. I spoke for 40 minutes. I told my journey focusing on the invisible, on the importance of not underestimating silences. And I ended with a phrase I prepared especially. Sometimes the only thing that separates a failure from a visionary is the time it takes for you to understand them. The room fell silent. Then, another applause. But there, in that instant, I knew that those who needed to hear it heard it. On my way out, I saw my mom in the audience. She hadn't told me she was coming. She was standing, her eyes filled with tears. I approached her, hugged her tight. She whispered, "You won the right way." And I knew it. It wasn't about fame, nor about money. It was about dignity. I returned to Austin that night, and for the first time in years, I cried alone. Not out of sadness, but out of release. It was as if the last knot had come undone. Everything had fallen into place. Everything made sense now. A few months later, I sold MindSync to a multinational company, not for the value, although it was high enough to secure generations, but because I felt it had fulfilled its mission. The condition of the sale was that the MindWorks Foundation would continue with total independence. And so it did. I used part of the money to invest in environmental projects, and another portion to create a public open innovation library, where any young person with internet access could study, learn to code, and apply for scholarships. Years passed. My name still circulated in articles, but less frequently. And I liked that. Living outside the spotlight. Continuing to observe. Participating only when it made sense. Like a quiet presence. Today, I live in a simple house in the Colorado mountains. No ostentation, but with everything that matters. My days start early, with walks and black coffee. I still write code, but only for pleasure. And from time to time I receive letters. From people whose lives changed because of an invisible push. That's enough for me. And when I remember that Thanksgiving dinner, so many years ago, I no longer feel anger, only clarity. They laughed at the silence, but it was the silence that built me. And it's in that silence that I continue to live, in peace, whole, and irreversibly free. If this story resonated with you, like the video, leave your comment, and subscribe to the channel to follow more stories of silent transformation, where justice comes not with shouts, but with presence, purpose, and consistency. Sometimes, the best revenge is to become impossible to ignore.